led the work in Tucson before moving here. She was telling me ever since Ananda Dallas went online, it's become, ever since you guys had to give up your physical location, you have become even more magnetic, even more expansive, and have been doing even more activities. And I must say this half humorously, I was preparing for a webinar on losing the fear of death. And I says, I'm going to use this example. When you give up your physical location, you become more expansive, more vibrant, and start doing even more things. But coming back, I was listening to the affirmation, and I do hope you find an even better place than the one you gave up last year. When things open up in Texas, things are already open. So I'm sure you are starting to look in earnest, and something wonderful will materialize. But that affirmation also reminded me of the Sunday service topic, which is deeds versus intentions. Because when you want to get a new place, you have to sign a deed. And unfortunately, on the physical plane, a deed is legally enforceable and has value, has power. An intention does not. If you say we intend to get a place but never sign the deed, you can't get the place. An intention is not enough. But when we are talking about consciousness, which is what the spiritual path concerns itself with, refining our consciousness, their deeds and intentions have equal value, have equal import. And so, if we want to aim toward perfection, it's not enough to just put on an outward show, or even if not putting on an outward show, it's not enough to just learn how to conceal our emotions. The intentions have to be purified also. So, I want to take just a couple minutes to read this Sunday's particular excerpt from Rays of the One Light. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. Jesus Christ emphasized repeatedly the spirit, not the letter of the law. In chapter 5 of the Gospel of Saint Matthew, he speaks of the sin of killing and of the legal punishment attendant on that sin, but says that more important than the act is the desire to kill or to do harm. He shows that the sin of harmful desire goes beyond merely wanting to kill. My message to you, he said, is this: whoever is angry with his brother without cause already stands condemned. Whoever contemptuously calls his brother a fool shall answer for it to the Supreme Council. And whoever calls his brother an outcast of God shall be in danger of hellfire. Brother here means any other human being. For all of us, in the highest sense, are brothers and sisters, children of our one Father, Mother, God. The true self of one is the self of all. Okay, so all right, somebody typed in saying you guys did the reading, but I am happy I did that first part because that's what I wanted to focus on rather than the Bhagavad Gita part. And what I want to, when I read that excerpt, I went to the King James Bible, which I like reading. It's very poetic, and the whole chapter 5 is about all these directions and guidelines. You should do this, you should not do this, make sure you're doing this right, don't do this. The intentions matter. So there's a lot of, so to speak, commandments. The chapter 5 from the book of Matthew is primarily about commandments. And traditionally in Christianity, the way these commandments are shared, the import is if we don't follow them, God will be unhappy, or God doesn't like it if we don't do certain things, or something else happens, and God might turn away from you. And I sometimes joke when we hear this saying, well, if God has likes and dislikes and can get angry and can get unhappy, he needs to take our lessons in meditation and sign up for the path of Kriya, so he can learn how to get rid of his likes and dislikes and all those things. And Swami Kriyananda often used to say, we make God in our image, rather than realizing that we are made in God's image. So we think there's this fellow in heaven who's going to have all these mood swings based on what we do, and then he's going to judge us. Well, that's how human beings behave. Our job is to realize we are made in the image of God. And so the whole purpose of commandments, so to speak, is not to appease God or make sure we are on the right side of the law and He's sort of happy with us. He's giving us His endorsement, so to speak, but rather to realize that we are made in a certain way. Our job is to refine our consciousness, because the more refined our consciousness is, the more happy we are. And these guidelines, the commandments, are for us. They are guidelines so we can become more and more happy. So it's all about us. So even with prayer, I want to add this also. Remember that the purpose of prayer, the purpose of anything on this spiritual path, is not to change God's point of view. It's not to remind him of certain things, like when we say Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God. We are not trying to remind God, remember you are our father, remember you are our mother, or we are not trying to appease him. These, everything we do on the spiritual path is for our sake. Prayer helps us to focus our heart's emotions and feelings. It helps us to remember, oh, we are divine children. God is our father, mother, friend, and helps us to establish that relationship and helps us to live accordingly. Because when we realize we are divine children, then we want to live in a certain way. So everything that we do on the spiritual path is to help us. Many people have an aversion to prayer because they feel they are about to genuflect and bow to some all powerful being, and it's not clear why. But that's not the purpose. The purpose is to transform ourselves. So, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect, is the last line of this same fifth chapter of the Gospel of Saint Matthew. And that's the reason all these guidelines have been given to us, that we aspire to that same perfection. And these help us, they spell out the common scenarios in daily life where we can test how much we have, sort of moved towards that final perfection that we are seeking. And if we remember these things, these teachings in that way, then the spiritual path is a path of joy, it's a path of fun, it's endlessly inspiring. And this is what true religion is about. It's supposed to enthuse us about the final goal. It's supposed to make us feel it is achievable. It's supposed to make us feel happy and light and joyful as we traverse that journey. And that's also why I like this path so much, because you see that joy and that calmness, that friendship in everybody, not just one. Swamiji used to say, if one or two people manifested it, you could say it was something they had, some quality maybe they were born with or had developed. But when everybody manifests certain qualities, one has to say it's because of what they as a group are doing. And we are doing our best to practice these teachings to the best of our abilities, and we are also helping others to do the same. Now, there's two parts to this, deeds versus intentions. We talked about how intentions are as important as deeds, and that's why it's important, which will happen naturally. This happens through meditation. The reactive process comes under control. Through kriya yoga, the reactive process comes under control, because these fluctuations of consciousness, of emotions, anger, judgment, etc., these come due to the reactive process. So one of the easiest ways is to learn to meditate deeply, because there we become centered. And when we are centered, automatically our desire to even indulge in emotions, we might not show it outwardly, but to indulge in emotions that are harmful goes away. And but I also want to talk about the other side, where deeds and intentions are different, and that's on the physical plane, and that's on the spiritual path. I mean, all of us, I think everybody who's watching now or watching later, has the intention to meditate deeply, meditate every day, become self realized, but not everybody has the discipline to translate that intention into the deed. And unfortunately, just having an intention when we talk about our spiritual practices is not enough. And so I have given this example before, but I don't think I have given it to this group. But I want to share this because I learned a lot from this personal incident in my life about how we can remind ourselves that we need to translate our intentions into daily acts of meditation, of progress on the spiritual path. And the example I gave was, it's based on a story, not a story. It's based on something, an analogy Paramahansa Yogananda used to explain the creation of this world. He would say this world is like a movie, and he would say, go watch a movie in a theater. You see, when you're looking at the screen, it's very engrossing. There's the hero, there's the villain, people are dying, people are happy. You feel happy when the hero is winning, you feel unhappy when the villain is winning. Many people are so riveted to the screens, it actually takes on a reality for them. And so, but he said, if you turn and look to the beam, you realize suddenly that that's only a movie, it's only a play, it's not a reality. The beam which is creating that movie is the reality, which is manifesting all those dual scenes of pain, pleasure, joy, and sorrow. And to emphasize this point, he would often take his students to a movie, and he would get them seated in the right place, and he would wait until the most engrossing parts of the movie were playing out. And when the students were super transfixed on what was happening on the screen, he would tap them on the shoulder suddenly and they would, jerk awake. And then he would say, turn and look to the beam. And then they would look to the beam and the hypnosis of the movie would break. And this movie is hypnotizing, as we all know. Look at all the things that happen every darn day. I mean, the newspapers, I would have thought you couldn't have a newspaper except once a week. I mean, how much news can there be? But that's not true. I mean, when we were young, all of us, there were only newspapers. And I remember, at least in India, there would be one or two news programs on the television at 10 p.m., 7 p.m. But now they have these 24-hour news channels, and there is hundreds of those, and all of those probably are getting viewerships because they are managing to stay afloat. So this world is mesmerizing, it's hypnotizing, and we need to learn how to look to the beam. Now, the story I was going to share from my own life, um, which I learned a lot from, was I had shared this analogy of the world as a movie, and the analogy where Yogananda said, when you go to a movie theater, turn and look to the beam. I had shared this in Mumbai like 100 times. This was my favorite story, and I love sharing stories. So I had done this. And one day, I was still in India. By the way, Supriya asked me to share a little bit about myself. I served this work as a monk in India for 7.5 years. And now I've been in the US here at Ananda Village, sharing these teachings and practicing them to the best of my ability for about 3 years. So it's always a pleasure to see that sincere souls who really want to become free and who feel a deep connection and commitment to Paramahansa Yogananda abound east and west. But coming back to this story, I was in India and we found out that this movie Spider-Man Homecoming, which was, one of the Marvel movies which did really well, is coming out. And all the monks decided to go watch it, in an IMAX theater with the 3D experience. We had a brand new IMAX theater. This was in Pune. Some of you might know the other monks from there, Aditya and so on. So I was so cocksure, so to speak, confident that I knew these teachings. I had shared these in Mumbai for so many years. I knew what needed to be done. So I said to myself, well, when I go to the theater, I'll watch the movie, and it'll be easy. I'll turn and look to the beam at least 5 or 6 times because I'm trained in these teachings. I can't be super hypnotized, no way. So I go to the theater, and here's the fun thing that happened. The movie starts, and maybe half hour, 45 minutes into the movie, suddenly that get reminded, oh yeah, I'm supposed to look to the beam. But my mind said, not right now. Right now, the thing that's on the screen is important. You don't want to miss it even for a few seconds. The movie is for 2 hours. You can turn and look to the beam later. So I says, yeah, makes sense. The movie is for 2 hours. And so after maybe another half hour, same thing. Oh, now I should look to the beam. He says, well, not yet. I mean, look, this is the important part. This is where the plot's unraveling. You don't want to to look away from the screen right now. And so I says, you can do it later. So I says, okay, later. And this later, later, later. And I was so ashamed at the end when I had not looked to the beam at all. And I'm not making this up, but it taught me a lesson that intentions are not enough. This actual movie that God has created is millions of times more mesmerizing than the movie such as Spider-Man Homecoming or any other movie we talk about. And this is what happens to us. We get up, yes, we want to become self realized, but we have kids to take care of. They need to be prepared for school. We have our elders to take care of. Maybe one of our relatives is in the hospital. They need to be supported. We have a spouse who we need to look after or make sure their needs are taken care of. We have bills to pay, jobs to go to. And what happens when we say, oh, I'm going to meditate deeply? Not right now, later, because right now the scene in my life is very busy. It's very important. I can't neglect those other duties. But as you know, that later becomes days, weeks, years, months. And I would be very suspicious if there is not at least a few people in this group, I include myself in that, who sometimes feel, I don't think I have given these teachings the importance that they deserve and the intensity that I wanted to give them when I came to the spiritual path. I've somehow postponed it to this later. And that's why we need to guard against this. God is the best movie director, better than whoever made Avengers or whatever else is your favorite movie. Recently, it's Godzilla versus Kong. I mean, they are just making money of all these characters. They have realized they can be made into movies. So we need to be careful. And if we find that we are struggling with our meditations, it's not completely our fault. It's God's fault also, because He made this movie so entrancing. But we want to get self realized. And so, what is the solution? And I want to share 2 or 3 solutions that I hope all of you will put into practice. I try to put it into practice. It's easier for me because living in a monastery with other monks, there are certain guidelines in place which require me to put some of these things into practice. The first thing, and the most important thing, because as Supriya mentioned, I share lessons in meditation, the first class on the path of Kriya, online, and it's based on Jyotish's book Lessons in Meditation. Now some people use Raja Yoga as the starting point. That's all right, and maybe that's what you do in Texas. That's perfectly fine. But in that first chapter, Nayaswami Jyotish mentions that the most important thing on the spiritual path, which will make or break your spiritual progress, is having a routine. Now, because this is so important, I want to emphasize what a routine means and does not mean. Now, suppose you say, I'm going to meditate every day. That's not called a routine. If you say, I'm going to meditate 1 hour every day, that's not yet called a routine either. If you say, I'm going to meditate every morning and every evening, that's still not a routine. A routine has a time stamp. When you say, I'm going to do meditate every morning at 7 a.m., when you hear yourself committing to a time and sticking to it, that's a routine. So this is what prevents us from saying later, later, later. Have a routine. And I'm saying this based on my little experience with myself and others on the spiritual path. It is true. Having a routine will determine whether not you become self realized in this life. So start small. If you don't have a good meditation practice, don't say, I'm going to wake up at 4 a.m. and meditate for 3 hours. Take small steps, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 5 minutes morning, 5 or 10 minutes in the evening. Set a time, and then you can build on it. So if you do that, you will see it's easy, but having that routine is very important. And I also want to add two other things which are part of routine are once a week meditating twice or thrice as long. Yogananda said, meditate, have a longer meditation once every week. Now, again, if you say sometime during the week I'll have my long meditation, you will see it will be a long time before you have your long meditation because the weeks, months, years often will pass you by. So, set a day, set a time, and say, this is the time every day that I'm going to meditate longer. And if you set a routine, you will see these things are easy. And then, of course, get your friends involved. Do this as a group, and probably Texas has these meditations. I'm sure of it. I don't even need to say probably. Join those, make use of the power of group effort. And then finally, if possible, a part of routine also is taking a seclusion every year, because Swami Kriyananda recommended it. For those who live here, he suggested 2 weeks. That might be too much, but start with 3 or 4 days at least. Again, plan it. It's just like you plan your vacation well in advance. You don't just say, oh, I need a vacation sometime, and then it doesn't happen. But plan your seclusion now, today, rest of this day. Just see your calendar for 2021, and sorry, I was looking at what year it was, 2021, and try to put in 3 or 4 days where you say, I'm going to seclude. When things open up, maybe you come visit Ananda village with one of your other Dallas friends. I know Supriya and Mark and Maitri, they try to come here whenever possible. So just hitch a ride, so to speak, even though you might be flying, hitch a flight, if that's a phrase. But come on over. There is a power to group magnetism. There is a power to rejuvenating your energies by coming to such a place. And I know somebody, I think Supriya, typed in the timings for the meditation and the Kriya meditation. Make use of these tools. And when we do these things, naturally we see that it's easy to translate our intentions into deeds. This is what we need to do on our spiritual path. This is what you will need to do to get a center, translate the intention into a deed with all the planning, and which will happen when the group energy comes together. And on the plane of consciousness, we need to remember that intentions as well as deeds matter. It's easier to control the deeds, but we need to get rid of the intentions, wrong intentions also, because otherwise it's like a pressure cooker. You don't let the whistle and diffuse the pressure, but it's on the boil. And as long as our intentions are not clear, that's what happens to us, and that's what suppression is all about. But we need to transmute our emotions, which is turning the gas off, so to speak, so there's no pressure buildup happening. So I think those were a few things I wanted to share today. And Supriya mentioned that now is the time for informal interaction, and let me know what the